Obiture Solutions, a leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, is proud to bring its official support to the group of SIDS Leaders Conference.
Excellencies, ministers, honoured officials from the international agencies, ladies and gentlemen, a very warm welcome to this second meeting of the Group of Small Island Developing States Leaders, otherwise known as SIDS. My name is Juliet Foster, and I'll be guiding you through 90 minutes of lively and what I'm sure will be thought-provoking debate on the theme of pandemics, prevention and preparedness. Now, this event builds on the success of the first SIDS leaders meeting, which took place in early May. And at that time, we explored the impact of the Cotonou Trade Agreement on small islands. Now, as the international community begins to build a future beyond COVID-19, small island developing states are demanding a voice in contributing to and indeed benefiting from the process. But it has to start with addressing the distribution of vaccines to the largely vulnerable community of some 38 sovereign small islands across the globe. Now, to put this in perspective, a recent policy brief by the United Nations Department of Economic and Social Affairs reported that the number of COVID-19 related deaths per 100,000 people was actually higher in SIDS compared to other developing country groups and regions, and I'm including within that LDCs and LLDCs. So from the UN to the World Bank, from the EU to the various NGOs, the pandemic is seen as having not only magnified the vulnerabilities of SIDS, but has also faced them with stark choices that have the potential to cause long-term economic and social damage. A 2020 UNCTAD report found that SIDS experienced a GDP fall of 9% compared to a 3.3% decline in other developing countries. At the same time, only 6% of COVID-19 related spending for developing countries was spent on small island developing states. That's an increase of 2% from August 2020. Well, the result of this is that COVID-19 is stretching national budgets to breaking point, with SIDS having to choose between paying off external debts or preparing for another pandemic or even the next tropical storm. Well, as SIDS struggle to repair their public balance sheet, extra funds will be required to finance the immediate health response to lead the way to economic recovery once the pandemic itself is brought under control. It's fair to say that this is a truly massive task for small island developing states who rely on commodity exports, tourism, and indeed other services. So today we're going to explore whether the international community and transnational organizations recognize the enormity of the challenge and whether we're doing enough to help. And what about the vaccine program? COVAX, the body responsible for making vaccines globally available, has approved another $775 million to fund the delivery of the COVID-19 jab to lower income countries over the next 2 years. Does it go far enough? And how much of a difference will it make realistically? Well, to debate these issues, I'm delighted to say that we have a distinguished panel of experts. They each have an allocated amount of time to give a speech outlining their position, after which they will be asked further questions. For now, I would like to bring back our first speaker, Mark Brantley, the Honourable Mark Brantley, I should say. He is, of course, the Premier of St Kitts and Minister of Foreign Affairs for St Kitts and Nevis. So thank you so much for staying with us. And look, I'd like to get your comments on what you've heard so far, because clearly there is tremendous commitment and recognition to the plight of SIDS countries such as yours. We've heard this from the World Bank, for example, and the European Union. Do you feel optimistic now that your experiences are being taken on board? They are really being listened to, that you can be part of this solution going forward?
Well, I think when you're from the Caribbean and you represent SIDS, you have no choice but to be optimistic. The reality, however, is that sometimes our optimism isn't matched, and that commitments made are not kept. I'm very, very pleased at the tone and content of this conversation. I feel that those who are in attendance here, my colleagues, understand the problem, and part of solving the problem is clearly understanding it and accepting that there is a concern. for my colleague from the World Bank, for example, he spoke about the making available of financing. And that has bedeviled us in our region, because I go back to the point I made about the fact that many of us are treated as middle-income or high-income countries on a sterile analysis of GDP per capita with no regard whatsoever to our extreme vulnerability. And so as a consequence, we are locked out from accessing a lot of concessionary financing that would otherwise, of course, be critical in helping us to build capacity. So that's a problem that we keep advocating in every forum, that there has to be some type of vulnerability index which takes into account the extreme vulnerability of SIDS and those of us in the Caribbean in particular. Just to give you a sense of how this has worked, that even in terms of our participation in the COVAX facility, that these types of criteria were also used to look at one's standing in terms of GDP per capita to determine how one could participate and at what cost in the COVAX facility. So that even a facility like that was designed to save lives ultimately had these restrictions, if you will, or parameters put on it. I will make one last point that wasn't addressed, but that is that even in terms of access now to vaccines, we are getting from the pharmaceutical companies that they require indemnification to make vaccines available to many of us. And so even those countries that have the resources to purchase vaccines are being told that you must indemnify and hold us harmless, so that if these vaccines approved for emergency use by the WHO cause any harm, that these companies are held blameless. And that, of course, is another obstacle that is being put up in the way of vaccine access and making this life-saving technology available to more people across our region and across our world. So that too is a concern that we have in terms of small, vulnerable countries which are not vaccine producers, but are being asked to access vaccines to save lives, that the governments here must indemnify large multinational pharmaceutical companies, which have budgets far in excess sometimes of all the SIDS combined. So that gives a sense of what we're dealing with. And we think that policies that have, I believe, a more humane and an approach that recognizes our extreme vulnerability are the types of policies that we really would like to see inform international policy making and policy making at the multilateral level. Thank you very much again, and thank you for this glorious opportunity to engage with so many brilliant minds from across the world.
And Minister, we thank you as well for your time, and you have to leave us because there have been events in the Caribbean tragically involving Haiti, and I know that you need to address those. So thank you so much for your time. Let me return to the speaker who was talking before you, and this is Nicolas Courtros, who's the Chief Executive of Oberthur Fiduciaire. I want to focus on the antiviral banknotes. It is groundbreaking, but how much of a potential game changer could these currencies be for small island developing states? Would I be right in assuming that the importance lies in perhaps the fact that the alternatives to conventional cash that many developed societies take for granted, digital wallets, etc., then that you don't have that degree of proliferation? So these banknotes are literally a lifesaver in that context. We have a few problems hearing you, Nicolas. So can we hear you?
Here we are.
Yes, that's fantastic. We can hear you. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, as I have already mentioned, it's not, there's no miracle. There's no solution that we provide a miracle. So we need to take a number of measures in order to prevent this pandemic and other pandemics that are going to come by spreading around the world. So antiviral banknotes is one of the objects that, of course, are changing hands every day over years. And this can be very efficient when you have this kind of technology, BioGuard technology, for the population that is using it. But in addition to that, any other object that can be protected, that can prevent contamination, is going to help everyday's life in the SIDS and in other countries, and of course help the economy and the social life of the populations.
Okay, Nicolas Courtois, thank you so much. Please don't go away because we will have time for some more general questions. And I'd like to put the first of these questions, if I may, to Councillor Fen Yong of the Permanent Mission of China to the United Nations Office at Geneva and other international organizations in Switzerland. I'm afraid my Chinese is not very good, but ni hao. It's a pleasure to see you. And just to remind our audience as well that he has very gamely agreed to stand in for Ambassador Mr. Li Song. So welcome. We're pleased to see you. But look, 10 countries have received 75% of vaccines that have been administered to date. From your perspective, what does this say about how the rest of the world regards small island developing states? If these countries are not getting as big a slice of that vaccine pie, what does it say about the rest of the world?
Well, thank you, Julia, to having me. And actually, it is indeed a great pleasure to be here. And I think it clearly illustrated the unequal allocation of the vaccine situation globally. This pandemic, what this pandemic tells us is, the world is very closely interconnected with each other, and it's also very vulnerable. And like many people said, nobody is safe until everyone is safe. So I believe a small island country needs to increase their voice in the international forum, such as the UN, like World Health Organization, and as well as like Montana Forum. And we need to, let their voice to be heard, and let the world realize that there is truly, indeed, nobody should be left during this pandemic. Only everyone get vaccinated, and then the world can be, go back, can be built back better. Thank you.
And I'd like to follow that up with you, if I may, Ambassador Doyle, because there is so much in what we just heard that resonates with you, because I know that you're very passionate about making sure that the voices of SID states are actually heard. But I guess that from your perspective, the worry has to be that if there is no equitable vaccine distribution, that this could, if not collapse, certainly put the health systems of some of these SID states towards that point of breakdown if they don't have the institutional capacity to cope. Is that your biggest fear?
Your assertion is absolutely correct. The Minister Brantley did underline the failing, dwindling finances in many of these small island developing states already before the COVID pandemic emerged. Many of these states, some of these states already least developing countries, Cape Verde being one of them, but also they all face huge debt issues that they've been trying to get to grips with for the last maybe 10 years. And the COVID-19 situation has accentuated these issues to an unmanageable level of magnitude. But Juliette, one of the things that I'm hoping in the next 48 hours, something like 20 of the leading economies, finance ministers and central bankers will be meeting in Venice, as was foreseen already this year. And on the agenda will be three important issues, obviously galvanizing the 20 leading developing states across the world in terms of dealing with climate change, ensuring that the somewhat tepid economic recovery following the pandemic can be transformed into something of a more sustainable economic nature for all countries involved, but also vaccination. And one of the, I think one of the expectations is that one of the dear desires of many of the SID states is that we are, is to recognize before the G20 finance ministers that time is running out in terms of this vaccination program, but that we do need a universal vaccination rollout. Something along the lines of the IMF proposed some time ago, which would cost about $50 billion US. But clearly if and as long as the pandemic is uncontained anywhere, new and potentially vaccine-resistant viruses and their mutations are going to be a risk everywhere. This point was very elegantly made by Dr. Briand from the World Health Organization. We need to pay special attention, not just to dealing with this particular vaccination, but also future variations of this. And again, the other issue is that there's a very large divergence in terms of the vaccination rollout across the globe. More than half of the adults in most high-income countries are partially or fully vaccinated in many poorer countries, and I include amongst this even some of the mid-income countries who are quite prominent amongst the SIDS are actually still struggling in single-digit terms in terms of vaccination. For all the reasons, by the way, that Minister Brantley and other speakers have spoken about. So clearly we have an opportunity here in the next 48 hours in terms of this G20 finance and central bankers meeting, where we are hoping, the expectation is that they will kickstart, galvanize some measures to deal with rolling out this vaccination program, particularly vis-a-vis vulnerable low and mid-income small island developing states. But secondly, we need to also address the heavy burdens of debt vulnerability that John Zood from the World Bank mentioned earlier, which is only going to get worse if we don't deal with this issue now.
Absolutely, and a point as well that Mr. Brantley raised too about these debt responsibilities and the mechanisms to address them. I want to bring Councillor Fen Yong back into the conversation because, look, we know that the UN Secretary General, he has called for COVID-19 vaccination production to be stepped up so that we can have this more equitable vaccine distribution. So from China's perspective, what do you regard as the key mechanisms to make sure that those operations are scaled up to achieve that equitability? And how can small island developing states be involved in this process? Because the worry is that there seems to have been a mindset of excluding them in the past, and the fear is that they will be excluded in current and future developments.
Well, thank you. Actually, currently, there are some mechanisms in vaccine production area. For example, we have Act A, vaccine manufacturing work group. Also, we have the COVAX vaccine manufacturing task force. And as far as I know, SID is also a member of Act A. So from my perspective, SID needs to increase its voice in Act A platform and to raise awareness about the unequal, the difficult access to the vaccine of the SID country. And also, I believe the international organizations like WHO, like Gavi, need to expand the emergency use listing of the vaccine. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. We can hear you, so please don't worry, we can hear you.
Well, also, COVAX needs to increase its vaccine portfolio, and we need more. We need more vaccines, and of course, qualified vaccines, and to increase. Therefore, we can increase the accessibility and affordability of the vaccine. On the other hand, I believe international organizations and the member states need to increase their investment in the vaccine development further. For example, we need to have more vaccines which are easier for transportation and storage, and therefore they can more suitable for the developing countries, including SID countries. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let me bring Nicolas Koutros into the conversation, because what we've heard in the time that we have spent together is that SIDS states have very specific vulnerabilities. And how do you think these small island developing states can actually benefit from the financial sector digital innovations that will help them to overcome the vulnerabilities of size, debt, and location? Because I guess there is a school of thought that because they're hamstrung by these vulnerabilities, then they're losing out in terms of some of these innovations that are taking place, which could also be beneficial in the wider puzzle.
Thank you for the question, Juliet. Definitely, we know that small islands have budget restrictions, and these budget restrictions are right now under extreme pressure through the pandemic. The solutions, the technical innovations that we are proposing, and of course there are other solutions in the market, can help them with a very low cost to overcome this situation and to prevent as well from future pandemics. And in this case, their reputation as well will increase, and the attractivity for the touristic sector will be again restored, and of course the economy will become better. So through innovation, through low-cost application of this innovation, the economies of these islands can definitely improve.
And Nicolas, do you get the feeling that the clock is ticking on this one? Because small island developing states have been very dependent on various sectors, and there is a realization that they need to diversify to make themselves less economically vulnerable, and that if they don't have access to these innovations, it could potentially undermine that objective.
Well, I would not say that they don't have access to innovation. They do have access to innovation, and this access to innovation is not it's not costly. It is a matter of deploying measures that today are existing, that they are available, commercially available, and have the willingness to go with it in a systematic way. So again, this can be very efficient from a cost point of view and from a social point of view.
Okay, and time is running very, very tight, but I would like to put the final question to Ambassador Doyle. This is a very important subject, something which you are very, very passionate about. You've invested many years of your time in fighting the case for small island developing states. But are you worried about how they will cope if there is another pandemic? In other words, how underprepared are they? And more importantly, how would the fallout impact the rest of the world?
It's clear that they, as I said in my opening welcoming remarks, that these small islands, by virtue of their size, do not have the institutional capacity in terms of medical institutions, stocks of medicines. They have excellent trained doctors and nurses, but they don't have enough of them, which is why many of these small island states almost immediately last March or April, when the pandemic emerged, went into complete lockdown almost immediately and closed the borders. St. Kitts and Nevis was amongst the first small island state to do this. And this had an immediate, obviously, effect in terms of safeguarding the citizens. It had a devastating effect, however, in terms of tourism. The figures cited by the gentleman from the World Bank, between 60 and 80% decline in income streams associated with tourism, is a catastrophic figure and not easily replicated by other sectors of industry. So these issues do have to be, I think, addressed now. And as far as the future or preventing or mitigating future instances of pandemics, well, there are 2 points I wanted to make. First, And to pick up again on what Minister Brantley said about pharmaceutical companies wishing to be indemnified before providing any access to the vaccinations, I think there's an important role to be played by international organizations, the UN, the EU, and so on, in terms of encouraging and pressing regional developed nations to exert pressure on vaccine producers to partnership with global manufacturing sites in each of the SIDS regions. In other words, there could be 4 regional manufacturing vaccine centers in each of the 4 regions, under license by the big pharmaceutical companies. That's certainly one potential area of reflection going forward. And the second area that we haven't spoken about today at all is the vulnerability of the food and medicine supply chains at SIDS levels, which need to be, in my view, very urgently reviewed, with the assistance, I might add, of the WHO, the FAO, and perhaps the EU, who have the expertise in this area. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that, Ambassador Doyle. And I would also like to extend my thank you to Nicolas Koutros. So thank you for providing the financial input, really putting things into context for us. That's most welcome. And also to our representative, Councillor Fen Yong of the Permanent Mission of China to the United Nations Office at Geneva and other international organizations in Switzerland. He was standing in there for Ambassador Mr. Li Song. So we thank you so much for your contributions and also your patience, because we did have a few technical issues, but I'm pleased to say that we managed to conquer those. But you know what? It doesn't dilute the value of the message that the international community must work together to help SIDS states. It is in nobody's interest to see them fall. They have a unique set of problems. We must address those problems to work successfully with them. But at the end of the day, the vaccine distribution program is an important part of that solution. And it's incredibly heartening to see how various players have been trying to push this and to make things happen, such as China, for example, and indeed the World Bank with its financing and the work that it is doing with COVAX, the body responsible for vaccine distribution. So once again, thank you all so much for your patience, also to our online audience and to the members of the panel, some of whom had to leave us early for various engagements, but for those of you who stayed with us, we appreciate your time. All I can say now is have a wonderful afternoon, what remains of it, and I hope to see you again very, very soon. And to all of you, please stay safe.
Overture Solutions, leader in secure document printing and a privileged partner in digital transformation, was proud to bring its official support to the Group of SIDS Leaders Conference.